Decommissioning, our nuclear future. Within 30 to 40 years after being built, every nuclear power plant constructed becomes so radioactive that the entire plant must be dismantled and completely taken apart. Every radioactive piece of the plant must then be safely transported and buried at a nuclear disposal site, where it has to be carefully guarded for thousands of years. This process of dismantling is called decommissioning. The Humboldt Bay nuclear power plant, located 300 miles north of San Francisco on the California coast, seems likely to be the first commercial nuclear plant ever to be decommissioned. It started operating in 1963, but was shut down over 35 times due to technical problems and large radioactive leaks. The plant was finally shut in 1976 when earthquake faults were discovered under the plant. In 1980, a major earthquake destroyed this freeway overpass near the plant. With both nuclear experts and members of the local community urging that the plant was too dangerous to remain standing and should be decommissioned, the whole issue of what to do with worn-out and unusable nuclear power plants has surfaced as a major issue of public concern.
As individuals, we really do have a power to do something about all this, and that's to stand up and not let it happen, to say no whenever we can, whether it's to write a letter to the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board or to blockade Diablo Canyon. We can take responsibility for these things ourselves because no one else is going to do it for us. No one else is going to do it, certainly not the utility companies, certainly not the regulators, and certainly not the government. We know where they stand on it. But the reason nuclear power is in trouble is because people like us have said no.
But why has the issue of decommissioning not been raised until now?
Decommissioning is like a number of other issues in this whole area where the day of reckoning perhaps has been postponed. People just haven't dealt with the precise question about how we're going to deal with a number of aspects related to the nuclear industry. For example, the related question of where we're going to put all the nuclear waste and how much that will cost to adequately dispose of the nuclear waste has also been one that has never really been answered until the present, and indeed, even at the moment, it is the case that the Congress is wrestling on an ongoing basis with this whole question of nuclear waste, where to put it, what will be adequate in terms of isolating the waste from the environment for the necessary period of time, how much that will cost, who will pay. All of those questions are still being thrashed out in the Congress. So a number of these questions were really put off, and I suppose the answer in part lies in the fact that for a lot of reasons, both military and civilian, the government of the United States for the past 30 years has fostered the development of nuclear power. And there is a tendency when you're fostering the development of a new technology to leave some of the unanswered questions unanswered and perhaps even unasked, because you'd just rather deal with that later while you're developing the industry.
In our zeal to spread these what we perceived at the time the benefits of nuclear power, we rushed ahead and we didn't do all of the necessary homework. There were a lot of things we didn't do. We didn't figure out how we were going to handle the waste. We didn't do necessary design verification tests on emergency systems. We didn't worry or take into account the possibility of earthquakes on the design of the plants, and we just didn't worry about the ultimate need to decommission them. I suppose, as optimistic engineers, felt that that was a problem that we'd deal with when the time came.
Is decommissioning a health and safety problem?
Decommissioning exposes workers to very concentrated radioactive risks, which require extraordinary precautions. The use of robots, the use of water as a shield, proper radiation shielding suits, and the workers must be convinced before decommissioning starts of these intricate step-by-step precautions that must be taken. Now, you know that Humboldt has to be decommissioned sometime in the next few decades. Now, it's either decommissioned now, it could be decommissioned after an earthquake splits it, it could be decommissioned 20 years from now when it's cooled off a little bit. Still, you've got nickel-59 and many other very long-lasting radioactive elements. It's going to be hazardous at any time.
Is decommissioning an economic problem?
The original assumption was that it would be too cheap to monitor. The current accepted figures show that nuclear power is even more expensive than conventional methods of producing power if you add in all of the related costs. For example, when they originally, and even now when they estimate the costs of nuclear power per kilowatt, they do not include costs such as decommissioning costs. They do not include government subsidies of $50 billion, which went into reaching the technology that enabled them to produce nuclear power. And it's totally unrealistic, and most observers will agree now that the original figures were grossly underestimated. They did not include costs which should have been included, and with the current situation, a tremendous increase in the cost of the fuel for the plant, there's no way of making a case for nuclear power as being a more economical power than could be produced by other methods.
Is decommissioning a technical problem?
Decommissioning was never discussed until recently. There was very little discussion because decommissioning was 30, 40 years away always. A nuclear plant has a lifespan of about 30 years, maybe less if it's like Indian Point or Humboldt because of other circumstances. But the plant tends to become endemically radioactive and brittle after some 30 years. And this is a problem that was always stated in the following manner. Oh, decommissioning? There are technical problems to deal with that. And besides, we've got quite a bit of time to smooth off the raw edges of these technical problems, and don't worry about it. Well, now more and more people are going to have to worry about it because some of the plants are into their 20th year and other plants have more immediate problems that require shutting down and decommissioning. Now, it's interesting to note that the decommissioning problem reveals so many of the overall adverse characteristics of the nuclear power option to begin with. And let me run through a few of these briefly. First of all, we have the science aspect of it. What are the ethics involved when scientists do not tell the people that they are ultimately serving and the people who are paying their salaries about the decommissioning problem? Why have the scientists been so silent about this in the 50s and in the 60s and in the 70s? It seems that science can be viewed as an early warning system. They're the ones who know the early alerts, the early signals. They have a professional obligation to share that kind of foresight which comes from their expertise. They have not done so. That is a characteristic running throughout the nuclear power history in our country and overseas. The scientists follow a motto called "Mum's the word," "Papa knows best," and besides, we don't work for you, we work for Westinghouse, General Electric, or the Atomic Energy Commission.
Is decommissioning a political problem?
I think the biggest concern that PG&E may have on making a decision to decommission Humboldt Bay is that when and if they make that decision, that will indicate that they admit that Humboldt Bay is no longer operable and cannot economically be upgraded. I think that that's a public relations problem for them because Humboldt Bay only operated 13 years out of its intended design life of 30 or 40. And the implications of that on the operation of Diablo Canyon are severe.
One of the critical factors that surrounds Humboldt Bay and PG&E, which owns and controls Humboldt Bay, is the precedent-setting situation. PG&E is very, very reluctant to allow or to admit to the decommissioning of Humboldt Bay because it might set a precedent for the Diablo Canyon plants, and they're very reluctant to set a precedent that a plant can be shut down because of seismic problems. There's a second factor involved, and that's related to decommissioning. There has been no actual decommissioning experience with a plant of this type. This single plant that has been totally dismantled, decommissioned, is at Elk River, which was a very small and very different plant. And the feeling is among a number of observers that PG&E is very reluctant to take on a decommissioning job where it is not sure that it might not be opening a can of worms, and to indicate to the rest of the country that they don't have the technology to handle the problems that might come up.
Decommissioning is a very important part of the questions surrounding nuclear power. Is nuclear power safe? Can we afford it? What can be done with nuclear wastes? What can we do with nuclear power plants when they become too radioactive to continue using them? Finally, what can we as citizens do about the whole nuclear issue?
And those of you who've been involved in this kind of civic activity know that not only is it something that must be done if we're going to be proud of our society and fair in our society and beacons to the rest of the world and respectful of future generations for whom we are trustees, but it also is a way of improving the personal quality of individuals' life. How many people are unhappy today because they feel powerless against grievances, because they feel alienated, because they feel excluded, because they feel discriminated against, because they feel opportunity denied, not only job opportunity, but citizen opportunity, because they feel bored. A lot of unhappiness comes from those traits. There are millions of people who sit day after day, nothing to do. They're bored. Many of them retired with plenty of skills, and they're bored silly. How many times can you play these games in Sun City, Arizona? And people who get involved in civic activity, they don't stay alienated, powerless, bored, excluded, denied. So really, if you ask yourself, how do you develop a higher standard of happiness on a day-to-day basis? One of the answers is that you become involved in applying your values to improve the society or the community around you. And those of you here who have done that, I think, know exactly what I'm referring to. But it isn't something that's publicized. You don't see big billboards saying, "Be happy, get active."
Just give me the warm power of the sun. Give me the steady flow of the waterfall. Give me the spirit of living things as they return to play. Just give me the restless power of the wind. Give me the comforting glow of a wood fire. But please take all your atomic poison power away. I want you to take all your atomic